There's a name that still carries an almost mythical weight more than 15 years after his sudden passing, a name that represents unparalleled talent, unimaginable fame, and a level of public scrutiny that no human being should ever have to endure. Michael Jackson, the king of pop. But behind the glittering legacy, the sold-out stadiums, the iconic moonwalk, and the timeless music lies a much more intimate, tender, and heartbreaking story. The story of 3 children he loved more than life itself: Prince, Paris, and Biggie. For years, the world only caught fleeting, often distorted glimpses of them. Small figures hidden behind masks and veils, running through the enchanted grounds of Neverland Ranch, or standing quietly beside their father during rare public appearances. What the world didn't see, and what Michael Jackson worked so tirelessly and desperately to keep hidden, was a father's fierce, almost obsessive mission to protect his children from the very same world that had consumed him since he was a small child. Today, with time having passed and the children now grown into young adults, the full story of what really happened to Michael Jackson's children and the many painful truths he shielded them from their entire lives is finally coming into clearer, more honest view. Michael Jackson became a father relatively late in his extraordinary and often turbulent life. Prince Michael Jackson was born on February 13, 1997. Paris, Michael Catherine Jackson, followed on April 3, 1998. And Prince Michael Jackson II, known affectionately as Blanket in his early years and later choosing the name Biggie, arrived on February 21, 2002. From the moment each child entered his world, Michael approached fatherhood with an intensity, devotion, and protectiveness that was born directly from his own deeply painful past. Having been thrust onto stages as a 5-year-old prodigy, robbed of any semblance of a normal childhood, forced to support his entire family financially, and subjected to relentless discipline and control under his father Joe's management, Michael made a solemn vow that his own children would never experience the same loss of innocence, freedom, and joy. This vow became the central driving force of his private life and shaped nearly every major decision he made as a parent. What Michael hid from his children was not shame, not dark secrets about himself, and not some hidden scandal. It was the cruelty, the chaos, the relentless judgment, and the unrelenting harshness of the outside world. He hid the constant barrage of aggressive paparazzi who would stop at nothing to get a photograph of the children. He hid the numerous death threats that arrived regularly at his home. He hid the vicious tabloid stories that painted him as a monster and questioned his every move. He hid the full extent of his own chronic physical pain from severe vitiligo and lupus. He hid the deep emotional scars left by his own traumatic childhood. He hid the crushing loneliness and immense pressure that came with being the most famous and scrutinized person on the planet for decades. Above all, he hid the fear that the world might one day turn against his children the way it had turned against him. Michael wanted his children to experience joy, wonder, safety, and a sense of normalcy that he himself had never known. Neverland Ranch was the ultimate physical and emotional expression of this protective love. The massive 2,700-acre property was transformed into a child's paradise, complete with amusement park rides, a private zoo, multiple movie theaters, candy stores, lakes, and endless spaces for play and imagination. Michael filled it with laughter by regularly inviting underprivileged and terminally ill children to visit and enjoy the grounds. For his own kids, Neverland was more than just a home. It was a carefully constructed bubble where they could simply be children without the weight of the outside world pressing down on them. Private tutors, limited access to television and news, heavy security, and a deliberate separation from public school environments were all part of Michael's comprehensive plan to give them as much normalcy as possible within an undeniably abnormal life. The masks, veils, and disguises they wore in public were not signs of strangeness or eccentricity, as the media often cruelly claimed. They were deliberate acts of love and protection, practical tools designed to allow the children some degree of freedom to go out without being constantly photographed, harassed, or exposed to the public eye. Prince and Paris were born to Debbie Rowe, Michael's second wife, through artificial insemination according to public statements and reports. Biggie's biological mother has never been publicly identified, as Michael arranged a surrogate and chose to keep those details extremely private. Legally and emotionally, Michael was their sole and devoted parent. After his divorce from Rowe in 1999, he raised them as a single father with the help of trusted nannies and select family members, always maintaining primary custody and day-to-day control over their upbringing and environment. Debbie Rowe, in several interviews given years after Michael's death, has described him as an incredibly attentive, loving, and hands-on father. She revealed that Michael's greatest fear was that his children would be exposed to the same media circus and cruelty that had tormented him for most of his adult life. He limited their exposure to news and media coverage about himself. He worked hard to ensure they formed their own opinions of him based on their personal daily relationship, rather than what strangers wrote in newspapers or said on television. He read them bedtime stories, played games with them, watched movies together, and created elaborate, magical Christmas celebrations at Neverland. These moments of genuine joy and connection were real. and they stand in stark contrast to the often negative and sensationalized image the tabloids tried to paint of his parenting. Then came the tragedy that changed everything in an instant. On June 25th, 2009, Michael Jackson died suddenly at the age of 50 from acute propofol and benzodiazepine intoxication. Prince was only 12 years old, Paris 11, and Biggie just 7. The loss was catastrophic and life-altering for the children. Their grandmother, Catherine Jackson, became their legal guardian, and they were moved away from the fantasy world of Neverland to be raised primarily within the Jackson family compound in the Calabasas, Encino area. The transition from the magical, protected bubble their father had built to the harsh reality of life without him was incredibly difficult. They had to learn how to navigate school, friendships, public attention, grief, and their own identities while carrying one of the most famous and controversial last names in the world. Prince Jackson, the eldest, has grown into a thoughtful, grounded, and relatively private young man, now in his late 20s. He has largely chosen a life away from constant public attention, focusing instead on business ventures, philanthropy through organizations like Heal LA, and preserving his father's positive legacy. He served as an executive producer on the recent Michael biopic, and has spoken thoughtfully about the challenge of honoring such an enormous legacy while trying to build his own identity and future. Prince has maintained a very close bond with his siblings, and has expressed deep gratitude for the love and protection his father tried so hard to provide. He has purchased property and appears to value stability, family, and a sense of normalcy above fame. Paris Jackson has taken the most public and visible path of the three. Now in her late 20s, she has built a successful career as a model, singer, actress, and activist. She has appeared in major fashion campaigns, acted in American Horror Story, released music, and become an outspoken advocate for mental health awareness and social justice. Paris has been remarkably open and honest about her struggles with depression, anxiety, and suicide attempts as a teenager. She has spoken candidly about the difficulty of growing up in the overwhelming shadow of her father's fame and the pain of losing him at such a young age. Her openness has sometimes created tension within the broader Jackson family, but it also reflects her desire for authenticity, healing, and truth. Paris has defended her father against what she sees as unfair or sensationalized portrayals, while also acknowledging the complexities of their family history. Bigi Jackson has remained the most private and low profile of the three siblings. He changed his name from Blanket to Biggie in order to create some distance from the childhood nickname that followed him into the public eye. He has successfully avoided the spotlight for the most part, appearing rarely in public and focusing on living a quiet, peaceful life. Of the three, he was the youngest when his father died, and has shared the fewest public memories or statements. He continues to maintain a very low profile and seems to value privacy and normalcy above all else. The children inherited significant wealth and ongoing income from Michael's estate, which has grown substantially over the years through music catalog earnings, Cirque du Soleil productions, the recent biopic, and other ventures. They are financially secure for life, but money has never been the main story of their lives. All three have had to navigate the unique psychological burden of being Michael Jackson's children, carrying both immense privilege and an overwhelming public legacy that they did not choose. What Michael hid from them created both blessings and long-term challenges. By shielding them so completely from the outside world, he gave them space to develop without immediate and overwhelming public pressure. But the sudden loss of that protection after his death meant they had to confront the full force of fame, speculation, media scrutiny, and the complicated, often negative narratives about their father all at once. The masks that once protected them became symbols that the world used to question their upbringing and their father's sanity. The seclusion that kept them safe also left them somewhat unprepared for the intensity of life in the spotlight as young adults. Michael hid his own physical suffering from them as much as possible. He did not want his children to worry about his constant pain from vitiligo and lupus, or the severe insomnia that plagued him for years. He presented himself as strong, magical, playful, and larger than life. He hid the financial stresses and fears about providing for their future. He hid the depth of betrayals by former friends and employees. Most importantly, he hid the crushing loneliness that came with being the most famous and watched person alive for decades. He wanted them to remember him as Dad, playful, loving, present, and fun, not as the burdened, exhausted icon the rest of the world saw. In many ways, Michael succeeded in his mission. His children grew up knowing they were deeply and unconditionally loved. They carry warm, cherished memories of Neverland, bedtime stories, laughter, elaborate Christmases, and a father who tried his absolute best to give them joy and innocence. As adults, they continue to honor him in their own individual ways while forging their own identities and paths forward. Prince focuses on legacy, stability, and business. Paris seeks truth, healing, and creative expression. Biggie chooses privacy and peace. Together, they represent different but connected responses to the same extraordinary upbringing. The story of Michael Jackson's children is ultimately one of profound love, painful loss, fierce protection, and remarkable resilience. What Michael hid from them was not darkness or shame. It was the harshness, cruelty, and judgment of a world that had already taken so much from him. What he gave them instead was a father's unconditional love, a foundation of wonder and joy, and the space to become their own people. As they continue to grow and navigate their lives as young adults, they carry both the light and the shadow of being Michael Jackson's children. And in doing so, they keep his deepest wish alive, that they could simply be happy, healthy, and free to be themselves. The music remains, the legacy remains. And his 3 children, now navigating adulthood with grace, strength, and their own unique voices, are living, breathing proof of a father's greatest hope and sacrifice.